And thank you to the local systems community for having us to share with you some of our experiences in terms of strengthening policy systems here in Africa, but also in Asia and in other places. Our work as Policy Link is one that's been very exciting for me particularly, and this topic is really interesting for someone like me, being a Kenyan and an African that thinks a lot about how do we live a sustainable capacity in the places we work. So I'm gonna share with you some of the things we do. I'd like to start by saying a little bit about our activity, our project, how we are organized. And that's important because we've built a culture, an internal culture in Policy Link that's very collaborative. We have a set of principles. Yes, I'm not going to go through that, the core purpose, goals, and principles. But the reason I put it there is to show you that in the first instance, you have to be internally made for a facilitative approach with your stakeholders, for an approach that allows you to work with local actors in a collaborative way. So within Policy Link, we have an activity team approach to implementation. We have principles that are designed and adapted to build a culture of working together, and that prepares us to work with others. We are unlike many policy activities that focus on specific policies. We focus on the systems. We try to build the systems, especially building the capacity of policy actors within the systems and their relationships and how they work, so that regardless of the policy in question at any particular moment, the system is stronger enough to deal with that. And like Courtney has just mentioned, we are kind of sector agnostic, meaning that we may be working on trade, nutrition, climate change, and broadly food systems. But our interest is not on a specific policy. Our interest is usually on how do we leave a stronger system in place, and how do we ensure that local actors are working collectively to build that system. I won't dwell so much on Policy Link. I think Courtney has already said what we do, but just to mention that we have got a set of buy-ins at the moment. You'll meet some of the buy-in leads. One that works across Africa, the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Plan, buy-in CADA for short, where we support the African Union's capacity to manage a continental program, a continental plan for agricultural transformation in Africa. We are providing a lot of facilitation support there. We have got a buy-in in Ghana that's really targeting the capacity and the behavior of policy actors broadly, mainly in food security and also climate change. I would call them policy subsystems. In Ethiopia, which is a very interesting buy-in for us, we are dealing with a situation where there is flux, there is change, there is dynamism. There's a new developmental paradigm that's just beginning with the new government, the Prosperity Party in power. And they're asking the questions, how can we bring more inclusivity? How can we build agency amongst policy actors? And how can we encourage greater use of evidence in determining what the right policy should be? And how can our systems be more adaptive to this changing circumstance? And of course, in Bangladesh also, we are dealing with capacity issues there, institutional change, but generally thinking about the policy environment. And we've had some buy-ins in South Sudan as well as East Africa, where we did some work on trade. And we are currently discussing a new activity in Kenya that will be largely supporting the mission here in Kenya to think through what the policy agenda is and how we can improve coordination amongst players. So these are some of the things that are happening currently. I would like to share, I've just identified 4 areas that I think I'll focus on. And these 4 areas underpin a lot of the approach that we have, which, as I said, is about helping to build the system. Yeah. And the first of these that I'd like to say a few words on is how we identify and engage the real actors, the local actors. I was just reading something, maybe it's a week ago, nothing about us without us. So when you think about local as international development actors, for us, the word local has a real meaning. But when we work with our stakeholders, they are the local we refer to. And we want them to have the ability to change, to drive change, to make decisions, and so on. So usually the first step in our work is to identify who are these local actors, which are these local institutions, yeah, who are the right people to work with, yeah, what are their issues, what's the status of the system, yeah. So we start with the assessments and analysis, and most of our assessments, in fact all of our assessments, are participatory, meaning in the design and in the implementation, but most importantly in the interpretation of the results. When we have an assessment, we don't have an analyst that tells us what it means and what it implies. Instead, it is the people that we work with in the system that look at the assessment, look at the results and say, this is what it means. This is what is important for us. So that's particularly important if you want to start well in a system. And there are some examples that I've put there. Some of you may be familiar with the institutional architecture assessments as a methodology to establish the strength of a policy system. It's quite elaborate. We have developed it over the years, implemented it at different levels for different purposes. And it is quite agile, it's flexible. We have used it. We are currently in the throes of an IA assessment in Ethiopia, the validation and using it to determine action. We have also done other things, different kinds of stakeholder mapping. In East Africa, we did a process of identifying stakeholders. In fact, we had some missteps, and we are not afraid to make mistakes within Policy Link because that's how we learn, where we had a whole lot of stakeholders that were not relevant and found ways to narrow down. We are working on youth engagement, enhanced actor engagement in the CADAP process, and there we are using mapping techniques to identify who the relevant actors are. You may be hearing about some work we've done in Ghana as well with climate change scoping processes. We have also done some other related work there, and we are now thinking about citizen polling. This is where you get everybody within a particular policy ecosystem to respond, to tell you what they think. So this is the first step. Make sure you're working with the real actors, the real local actors, and on the real local issues. So assuming you know what the issues of that system are and who the actors are, we often, and this is something that we hold very dear within Policy Link, we think about the leadership capacity of those actors. How do you ensure that they have the right type of leadership? And in most cases where you're dealing with multi-stakeholder collaboration, that leadership is what we generally call facilitative leadership. The ability to bring groups together around a common vision to work together. This is really the heart of collective action, collaborative, multi-stakeholder collaboration and collective action. So a facilitative leader in most contexts has the right mindset, the right behavior. They have a conversational intelligence, emotional intelligence to be able to drive action. And so how do we build that? We have got training that is well customized, and we have applied this across our different buy-ins to build that behavior, to encourage that behavior. So we have modules there. We also select for it. So there are individuals who already have the motivation, who have the commitment, who have the desire to operate in a collaborative way, and we include those in our training. But importantly, we select cohorts to be trained together who are from the same system. Sometimes I call it system cohort approach, where you go into, let's say, actors working on trade issues, and you bring 20, 30 of them, and you train them in a certain leadership for certain leadership behavior, and then they go back to the same system and they understand how to work together. So this kind of training key for us. We have an approach that includes coaching. That's interesting. We can talk a lot about that later on. But also we use what we call action learning projects to help them model their leadership behavior. This means asking them to implement some actions, some particular activity in their work where they will be applying the skills, the leadership skills that they have learned. But our interest is really to work with these people on our other activities, and we are just building their capacity to be the kind of leaders that we need. We have some examples, and maybe some of my colleagues will talk a bit about some of this. The only one that I will mention there is in Ethiopia. We are currently targeting up to about 400 plus individuals to obtain a critical mass of folks who many have had zero previous leadership training, to start thinking differently in a context where this wasn't really a thing for them. And that's something that we are watching. It's very interesting. It's taking place, and then we will layer that with our other work going forward. So if you think about it, you have identified the right actors. You have built their capacity somewhat, the right leadership, the right thinking, the right behaviors. And now it's time to think about this third area, which is how do we, first of all, trigger and then incentivize and then sustain collective action. So we all know that a lot of our challenges require different players to work together, different actors, institutions, individuals, organizations working together. That's the heart of multi-stakeholder collaboration. So our biggest tool here is very advanced process facilitation, including facilitation of meetings sometimes, but facilitation that is of a certain kind where we ourselves have no stake in whether an issue goes left or right, what the decision ends up being, but we have a stake in building the space, the safe space for sustainable consensus and moving the process forward. And so we have facilitators going out and working with groups through their processes, their policy processes, and helping them to see that this is a way that they can always solve challenges together in a village, in a non-state actor setting, with government, with subnational governments, and so on and so forth. And so this is really key for us. And we don't go in just blindly. We also think about the issues and present evidence and bring in different players at different times, but always maintaining our neutrality, if I could call it that. This requires a lot of time, a lot of patience. So our project within it has the opportunity for us to say, well, we need more time. Well, we need to measure our progress differently. These are the sorts of things that are allowing us to work at local levels and to work with folks that may have difficulties of a certain kind that may not be addressed in rigid project designs. And we do a lot of coordination and trust building. And this requires time. If I could repeat that, you may need at least 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years to work in a system to build it in this way. We've had some successes with the CADAP process. Perhaps Edwin will talk about this later, but if you take the CADAP biennial review, which is a measurement of progress in agricultural development in Africa, all 55 countries, we are in I believe, the 4th cycle. We are now collecting data from all the countries, but it involves hundreds of actors. And we are right in the middle of facilitating this process. Multiple meetings, multiple players, all working towards the same goal, all very well synchronized, delivering a product and having lots of dialogue processes at regional, national levels and continental levels. So this has been a kind of a lab, if you like, of how you can facilitate without being the subject. We are often invisible, but we are in the middle of it, of facilitating all these players to come together. But there are also wrong approaches where we have failures, where, for example, in this Kenya case, and I could get into trouble with this, but the hiring of a consultant who then delivers a report that's of a high quality, very glossy, well done report, but does not contain the collaborative nature. There wasn't a group sitting together to build it, and then the report gets rejected or faces some problem. So you'd rather have a policy or an outcome that may not be the optimal outcome, but carries the collective input of everybody. So we've learned a lot from some other process. By the way, that wasn't a policy link process. It's just an example of something that didn't work. We have different ways to do these things, but one of the last things that I'd like to mention is across all of those, right from when we identify the actors, try to build their leadership capacity or facilitate collaborative governance, we try to have learning, joint learning, as something that's continuous, but also specific points of learning where we step back and say, hey, what are we learning from this? And what needs to change? How can we recalibrate? And only certain types of projects, even within USAID, can allow you to have learning that's adaptive. It has to be designed, it has to be planned for. And a lot of people, even in small village level projects, appreciate learning as a real outcome of a lot of implementation. So carefully designed and facilitated learning, reflection, and dialogue processes. We have many examples across our buy-ins, but in particular, introducing evidence in learning is key. What are the facts? What do the figures say? And that's without the evidence in learning processes, sometimes it's a little bit dry, it's opinions, and we do not know what the numbers say. But importantly, also, learning for learning's sake may not be as useful as when you have got joint action planning as part of your learning processes. So at the end of the day, the question is, yes, we now know that this doesn't work or this works. So what are we going to do about it? What's the action and who's going to take to do it? So we try to do that in a lot of our learning events. We have, these policy learning events that we implement. Lately, we have been using more rigorous approaches. Developmental evaluation is an example that I've put there. And in Bangladesh, I think we are learning a lot of things in our pillar approach. The whole East Africa activity was actually a learning activity. 20, 30, 40 years of trade programming in this region. Why aren't we making a difference? And we learned a lot on that. And so hopefully for the rest of this conversation, we are going to hear from my colleagues how some of these approaches have been implemented. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that this has been useful.